Hello everyone, it's that time again for another recap video for the games that I have done playthroughs and booked to game comparisons for the Nancy Drew Adventure series. For this recap, I'm focusing on what I'm calling the middle 10 Nancy Drew games. These are games 11 through 20. And the setup for this is I'm going to quickly review what these 10 games include, so things like the plot, the books that they're based off of, the mystery and their setting, and then I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown for all of them, as well as look at educational elements. Following that, I'm going to talk about my favorite parts of these games, so that'll be things like ranking worst to best game, who my favorite characters are, my favorite moment, and so on. I will then end this video with a special topic, and for this recap, the special topic is about storylines. And whereas the majority of this video is focusing on games 11 through 20, the special topic is not restricted to those. It's all inclusive of the entire adventure series. And I did want to note too, for anyone curious about the dossier series, they are not included in these recaps. They will be getting a recap video of their own. So with that, let's just quickly review what are the games of discussion in case anyone can't remember what games 11 through 20 are. So we start with 11, The Curse of Blackmore Manor. 12 is Secret of the Old Clock. 13 is Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. 14 is Danger by Design. 15 is The Creature of Kapu Cave. Number 16 is The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. Number 17 is Legend of the Crystal Skull. Number 18 is The Phantom of Venice. Number 19, The Haunting of Castle Malloy. And finally, number 20 is Ransom of the Seven Ships. So these 10 games are the primary focus for this recap. So now I'm just going to, as quickly as possible, go through all 10 of these games and just break them down. So let's start with The Curse of Blackmore Manor. This is game number 11. The plot for this story is that Nancy flies to England for her first international adventure. That's right, in case anyone's forgotten, this is the first game where we see Nancy go overseas. The first 10 games see her in the States the entire time. So once she arrives in England, she visits a family friend named Linda Penvillain, and she unearths strange family history and traditions. The book that this game is based off of is from the Nancy Drew Digest paperback series. It's number 77, The Bluebeard Room. The mystery is a curse, and I'm keeping track of any time that a treasure comes up in the series because we do see that so frequently. So for The Curse of Blackmore Manor, yes, there is a treasure involved. The setting is an old family manor. Location is Essex, England, and we have 5 suspects. Game number 12 is Secret of the Old Clock. In this game, Nancy visits her friend Emily Crandall, and shortly after her arrival, there is a fire and a theft of jewelry. And this event sets Nancy off on her first case in 1930. This game is based off of the Nancy Drew hardcovers and more than one. It's actually the first 4 books in that series. So we've got number 1, Secret of the Old Clock, number 2, The Hidden Staircase, number 3, The Bungalow Mystery, and number 4, The Mystery at Lilac Inn. The mystery is thefts and strange occurrences. Treasure, yes, there is a treasure of sorts, and for me when I'm counting treasures, it's not necessarily gold or jewels, but it's anything of value that is motivating the culprit, and there's certainly that in this game. The setting is primarily an inn, but also the surrounding small town. The location is Titusville, and we're not given a state in the game, so that's why I only have the community name mentioned, and we have 4 suspects. The 13th game is Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, and the plot for this one is that Nancy and the Hardy Boys team up for the very first time in person. They are all invited to help solve an old mystery, the disappearance of Jake Hurley, and they travel by rail and seek out clues to what misfortune befell him. And this game is the first game based off of a Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys super mystery, and it's number 8, Mystery Train. The mystery is a disappearance, more specifically a historical disappearance. There is a treasure. The setting is a customized vintage train, and the location I have sort of more than one mentioned. It's Illinois to Nevada, and this is because technically the game starts off in Chicago, Illinois, and then the group make their way by rail to Nevada. And we have 4 suspects in this game. Number 14 is Danger by Design. Nancy is undercover as an assistant, trying to learn why fashion designer Manette is behind in her work. And while she's in Paris, she uncovers clues from World War II, which lead to hidden artwork. So this game is based off of a Nancy Drew case file. It's number 30, Death by Design. The mystery is strange behavior and threats toward a person. There is a treasure in this game. And our setting is a design studio and the surrounding city of Paris, France. And we have 4 suspects. Game number 15 is The Creature of Kapu Cave. Nancy and the Hardy Boys join up again, and they're investigating strange occurrences in connected cases. So Nancy is looking into who trashed a camp, while the brothers are looking into a potential surf pro. This game is based off of a digest paperback. It's Mystery on Maui, number 143 of that series. The mystery is sabotage. There's no treasure in this game, and this is the first of the batch where we don't see a treasure. The setting is the Hawaiian rainforest and beach, and it's located on the Big Island of Hawaii. And we once again have 4 suspects. Game number 16 is The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. Nancy goes undercover at a mountain resort. So-called accidents and the presence of a lone wolf have guests leaving the lodge in a hurry. This is another game based off of a digest paperback. It's number 164, The Mystery of the Mother Wolf. Our mystery is sabotage, and once again there's no treasure for this game. The setting is a ski lodge located in the Canadian Rockies, more specifically in the province of Alberta. And we have 6 whole suspects for this game. Looking at number 17 next, The Legend of the Crystal Skull. We have Nancy and Bess together. They've gone on a holiday. And Nancy goes to check in on a friend of Ned, and when she's there, she witnesses a person in a skeleton costume creeping around the family manor. This is yet another digest paperback. It's the Mardi Gras mystery, number 81 of that series. The mystery is a suspicious death, as well as the presence of an intruder. And we are back to having a treasure in this game. The setting is a family manor, as well as a curio shop. The location is New Orleans, Louisiana, and we are back to 4 suspects. Number 18 is The Phantom of Venice. Nancy is asked to help investigate thefts of priceless works of art by a masked thief. And while in Venice, Nancy learns about Carnivale and that everyone has secrets to hide. Now, once again, a digest paperback. This is number 78, The Phantom of Venice. The mystery is thefts, and I've said no to a treasure because thefts is the primary mystery as it is, and the culprit's not building up to a greater hunt for something else of value. So that all stays as just being theft, so no treasure for The Phantom of Venice. The setting is a palazzo and the surrounding city squares, located in Venice, Italy. And for suspects, I've given 5 to 6 rather than a single digit, and this is because as we're playing the game, we don't know who the Phantom is, if that is one of the suspects who we see regularly and are able to interrogate, or if it's a 6th person. So, and we learn this as we go through the game, but for the purpose of this, I've decided to say that it's 5 to 6 because we are a bit uncertain until the very end. For number 19, we are looking at The Haunting of Castle Malloy. So Nancy is asked to be the maid of honor at a wedding abroad. Upon her arrival, Nancy learns that the groom has vanished, and there are many theories as to why he disappeared. This game is based off of the Bike Tour mystery. It's number 168 of the digest paperback series. The mystery is a disappearance. No treasure is involved in this game. The setting is a crumbling ruined castle in Baylor, Ireland, and we have 4 suspects. And then game number 20 is Ransom of the 7 Ships. Bess has won an ecotourism vacation, and then she winds up kidnapped. Nancy is then tasked with finding a treasure in order to free Bess. So this is based off of The Broken Anchor from the digest paperback series, and it's number 70. The mystery is a kidnapping, and of course there is a treasure because the treasure is what Nancy needs to seek out in order to get Bess back. The setting is an isolated island resort in the Bahamas, and rather uniquely, this game has a single suspect. So there's our breakdown of each individual game, and now I'm just going to look at a breakdown of them as a whole, starting with location. So half of these games are set in North America. And if you compare that with the first 10 games, those are all set in the States. So with this middle batch of 10 games, we see Nancy starting to travel abroad. As far as characters go, this is a bit of a different breakdown than the suspect count I was doing, but this is looking at physical characters. And we're going to see that they don't tally up the same way as in the breakdown of the games, because in some games we have more physical characters than we do suspects. For instance, whenever we see the Hardy Boys, that actually bumps up our physical character count, but I never included them as suspects in the earlier slides. So 3 of these 10 games include just 4 physical characters, and that's certainly quite a few less than we saw earlier. We have 4 of these games that include 5 physical characters. 2 of these 10 games have 6 physical characters, and then 1 has 3 physical characters. And you'll see that there isn't a game where I've noted one physical character for Ransom of the Seven Ships, which only has one suspect. And this is because technically there are 3 physical characters in the game. Along with the one suspect, we have George and Bess. So that's why we have a count for a game with 3 physical characters. Next, let's look at the source material, the books, and this I find really interesting. Only one of these games is based off of a Nancy Drew case file. And in comparison with the first 10 games, we saw quite a few more games where case files were their source of material. So this is quite a shift. We also have one game based off of a Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Super Mystery. As noted earlier, this is the first time we're seeing a game based off of that series. And I do want to clarify, this is from the original Super Mystery series, not the newer ones from the Nancy Drew Girl Detective and Undercover Brothers series. We then have a whole 7 games that are based off of digest paperbacks. We saw that a lot. That series came up quite often. And then we have one game based off of Nancy Drew hardcovers, and I put that plural because that one game is actually based off of 4 stories, all of which are hardcovers. The remaining 9 games are each based off of a single novel. And now let's just break down the mysteries quickly. We have one that involves a curse, that's the Curse of Blackmore Manor. One of these 10 games involves threats against a person, that's Danger by Design. We have one game where our mystery is about a suspicious death, that's Legend of the Crystal Skull. So those are all kind of unique for these 10 games. We don't see those themes repeated. We then have 2 of these 10 games where the mystery involves sabotage, 2 where the mystery is about theft, 2 where there's a disappearance. One is historical, the other is quite current. And then we have 1 mystery involving a kidnapping. And finally, let's break down that treasure hunt tally. We have 6 games where there is a treasure hunt of some sort. And if we look at the previous recap for games 1 through 10, that number's the same. 6 of those 10 games also involved a treasure of some sort. So sort of the final dryish thing is educational elements that we see in each of these games. This to me is really important. I loved being able to learn things, and you never know when something's going to spark your interest because of something you've read in a book or seen in a show or in a computer game. So I really like to point these out, especially because I do think of these games as intentionally supposed to be ways of learning things. So let's quickly look at what we learn in these games. So the Curse of Blackmore Manor, we learn about ancient runes and British language. An example of that is when Jane is letting Nancy know that a flashlight is referred to as a torch in the UK. And of course, the inclusion of Cockney slang. For Secret of the Old Clock, we learn about hobo symbols and a bit about Shakespeare, specifically the play A Midsummer Night's Dream. For Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, we have this concept of slugs. We see the periodic table of elements, although briefly, and piano. And we see piano coming up in quite a few of the games, a lot of the earlier ones, learning how to play the piano and learning about the notes. For Danger by Design, we have a few things. Roman numerals come into play, of course the French language, and a little bit about World War II. For The Creature of Kapu Cave, the focus is on horticulture and Hawaiian fables. White Wolf of Icicle Creek, we learn a little bit about seasonal animals. It's not a huge thing. We also learn that Alberta is a bit of a dinosaur site. It's where you might find fossils and dinosaur bones. And then, of course, we learn about wolves. Legend of the Crystal Skull, we learn about hoodoo, or voodoo, really. We, of course, learn about crystal skulls, and there's a small note about carbon dating. For the Phantom of Venice, we learn a little bit more about chess and chess notation and how that can be used for communication. We also learn a lot about Carnevale and, of course, the Italian language. For the Haunting of Castle Malloy, we have a few things. We see OM runes a little bit, binary codes included, constellations, and even a wee bit about chemistry. And then for Ransom of the Seven Ships, an educational element we see is math, and that's in relation to GPS programming, and then decoding messages. And I do consider that an educational element, even though it's not something that has a particular title or subject. We are learning how to figure out clues, how to decode encrypted messages, and trying to work out what one symbol might represent as far as a letter or a series of letters. So that's what we're learning about in Ransom of the Seven Ships. So before we move on to my favorites, the last thing I like to go over are locations that I've visited from the games. I just copied the same text from my original recap, but I am a keen traveler. I love going on adventures and traveling around the globe. And it's always fun for me to point out locations that I see in films or in games where I've been. To me, that's always really fun. So I'm just looking at my my count for locations I've been to from these games. For the first 10, it was a meager 3, and that's because they take place in the States, and I haven't spent much time there. So as Nancy's traveled overseas in this batch of 10, my count goes up a little bit more. So starting with The Curse of Blackmore Manor, that's set in England. Yes, I have been to England. For Secret of the Old Clock, I don't have a specific state again. I'm just referring to it as the American Midwest, and I know I've never been to that part of the country, so there's a no. Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, we actually get 2 locations again. So we start off in Illinois, and I've never been there, but we end in Nevada, and yes, I've spent time there. So that game does get a yes. For Danger by Design, France, yes, I've spent a couple hours in Strasbourg twice, and that's about it. The Creature of Kapu Cave, that's set in Hawaii. No, I've never been there, but it's been recently added to my list. I think it'd be a great place to explore, do some hiking and camping. White Wolf of Icicle Creek, that's set in Alberta. Yes, I've definitely been there. It's my neighboring province. And if we look more specifically at the Rockies, which is where the game really takes place, I've also spent some time up there. For Legend of the Crystal Skull, Louisiana, no, I've not been to that state. But I would like to go to New Orleans and experience either Mardi Gras or any of the other festivals there. I feel like that would be really fun. So that's another state that's now been added to my list. The Phantom of Venice is set in Italy. No, I've not been, but I've been really close. I was basically on the other side of a mountain from it. So close, but no, I have not been there yet. The Haunting of Castle Malloy is set in the Republic of Ireland, and yes, I've spent some time there. And then Ransom of the Seven Ships is in the Bahamas, and no, I've never been. So out of 10 games, even though we have 11 locations because of Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, I'm just counting this as the game count. I've been to the locations of 5 of these 10 games. So now we get to move on finally to my favorites. I'm really looking forward to this. I like talking about the things that I enjoyed. So we're going to start off by doing a ranking of the games from worst to best. And there's a lot of fluidity with these. Not really any hard and fast rules, with maybe the exception of my worst and favorite game. So coming in at number 10 is Ransom of the Seven Ships, which probably comes as no surprise to a lot of people. I don't like this game. I will concede that there are great points. The puzzles are really good in this game, and the music's really great. But I didn't care for the mystery. I also thought that the single suspect made the game really obvious and kind of boring, and I hated driving that golf cart. So I wasn't really drawn into the story. I didn't find it very fun at all, despite the great puzzles. So it is my least favorite, without a doubt, of these 10 games. Coming in at number 9, I put Danger by Design. Although I feel like I should have fun, like it feels really upbeat, and I always want to kind of play this game, there's always some regret because I'm not interested in the storylines. I don't feel engaged when talking with the characters, and I really hate the ending to this game. So definitely not a favorite. Next is The Creature of Kapu Cave, and quite similar to Danger by Design, like it feels very upbeat and happy and chirpy, but I'm not interested in the storyline, and again, I didn't like the ending for this game. And then number 7, I often refer to this as the third done in a row, because Danger by Design, The Creature of Kapu Cave, and The White Wolf of Icicle Creek actually came out. They were released in the order that they're presented here. And I didn't like The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. I do appreciate that it's set in Canada, and I love the snowy setting. That really stands out because we don't see that often. But I couldn't get engaged. There was too much going on, and I didn't feel like I could latch on to a particular part of the story and want to learn more and unearth the mystery. And once again, I didn't like the ending. So for these 3, 9, 8, and 7, those ones really could all move around. So Danger by Design is not necessarily worse in my view compared with The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. They're all kind of the same. But certainly they all do follow Ransom of the Seven Ships for being not that well liked for me. And then also pretty consistent is The Haunting of Castle Malloy. It would follow these 4. Again, a story I didn't really enjoy. It does have fantastic puzzles. Some of the best puzzles, I think, in the entire series. But as far as the story goes, I wasn't intrigued. I didn't really care for the characters. And the ending is really ridiculous. So, yeah, it doesn't work for me. So moving on to ranking of number 5, The Curse of Blackmore Manor. This game used to stand out so much. It felt so unique, and that expansive manor we got to explore was really wonderful. And I know this was, and probably still is, a very well-loved game of the series. It's not ranked any higher because since its release, there have been games that I enjoy far more, but certainly this game left a positive mark and impact on me when it first came out and is a really good game overall. Number 4 is Secret of the Old Clock. This is another game where it feels really upbeat and chirpy, even though the mystery is kind of upsetting. I really like the storyline. I like some of the characters, but I think Her Interactive did such a great job of melding 4 stories into one that I just really like the game. And there are some neat advances, I think, that were included in this game. So the mechanical stuff, these animations that were included that have really stuck out and struck me at the time, and there's this nostalgia around this game. And there are some other nostalgia points that I'll bring up later on, but there's a reason why it's number 4. It's a great game to me. Number 3 is Legend of the Crystal Skull, and it's in some ways funny that I rank this so high because the crystal skull element of it, to me, is totally ridiculous. I couldn't care less. But I find you don't even focus on that when you play this game. To me, you're looking at this scavenger hunt. That's what you're doing the whole time, trying to find these glass eyes. So I was always focusing on that and really drawn in. So I love that. I love what I'm doing in this game when I play it. I also appreciate the rainy weather. That's so unique. It certainly stands out. And this game, in my view, has some of the best animation as well as some of the best dialogue in the entire series. So I do really love Legend of the Crystal Skull. Coming in at number 2 is The Phantom of Venice. This game stood out to me when it first came out and still strikes me similarly today. I love the way that Nancy's brought into this adventure. It's quite different from the previous games. I mean, she's been asked to help solve a case before, but rarely, if ever, is it by an actual police force. I mean, she's often asked by a friend, and although Prudence has her influence in this game, she is being asked by the GDIF to help solve this mystery, and she's undercover, and I love what the mystery is. This idea of theft of art is so intriguing, and not that I'm a proponent for it, I do think that it's a really nice storyline, and I like the motivation of our suspects and of our culprit. I think our culprit is really intriguing. And really, for Phantom of Venice and Legend of the Crystal Skull, here's where we have more fluidity. Those two really could quite easily swap places for me. But number 1, this is an easy pick, Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. I love this game. It is so good. I like the setting of this train and trying to find these old clues that have been sitting around on this train for years. And it's in some ways more of a passive mystery because it happened so long ago. And I like that Nancy's teaming up with other detectives. And even the inclusion of the Hardy Boys, which I was not a fan of. I didn't want to see physical characters for them. I never liked them as phone contacts. I was really against this. But I have to admit, they really make this game. They're what make it shine. Joe in particular is just fantastic. He's hysterical, and he brings a lot of life into this game. So I love Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Very easy for me to say that it is, to me, the best of these 10 games. So moving on from the games themselves, let's look at the characters from these games and my favorites from each game. So The Curse of Blackmore Manor, Jane Penvillain is my favorite. It was a bit of a toss-up between her and Ethel, but Jane is the first child character that we see, and she has this really intriguing and rather tragic storyline and motivation for her as a person, which I was really drawn to and I think is very interesting and important to discuss. And she also has some really funny lines, so she is my favorite character from The Curse of Blackmore Manor. For Secret of the Old Clock, Emily Crandall is my favorite character, quite similar to Jane. She's got a bit of a sad story, and I'm drawn into that. She was interesting, and she has sort of a funny giggle and some funny lines. I also didn't like the other characters all that much, so quite easy to pick Emily for this game. For Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, Joe Hardy, hands down. He totally won me over despite my hesitation to see them in a game, him and his brother, but Joe is fantastic. Some of the best lines. Really easy pick for him to be my favorite character from that game. If I have to pick a suspect, then perhaps John Gray. I thought he was quite unique, even though we don't perhaps follow the same belief system. I do appreciate the way he addresses things and does note when there are scientific reasons behind things. He's not totally in this world where there's no proof for what he believes. But he was an interesting character. But definitely Joe, no matter what, is my actual favorite character from Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Looking at Danger by Design, I don't know if I should say this was a hard choice. I didn't like any of the characters from this game. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't find them at all engaging. I just wanted them to all go away. Heather is really, to me, the least annoying of them all. So she's the lesser of the evils. So that's why she's picked as my favorite. For the creature of Kapu Cave, sort of similarly, I didn't like the characters from that game with the exception of Big Island Mike. He has such a big personality, and his voice actor did such a great job of bringing him to life that it was actually quite easy to say that he was my favorite character, because he's the only one that I liked in that game. For the White Wolf of Icicle Creek, Lou Talbot, similar issue, having a hard time picking a favorite character because I didn't like most of them, but Lou did have an interesting backstory, and what he was doing at the lodge was quite intriguing, and he has some funny lines, and just the diversity he brings as far as being sort of a younger guy there was quite good. So I did pick him as my favorite character from that game. Legend of the Crystal Skull, I had a really hard time picking my favorite character because I like them all so much. They are all so well done. That game perhaps has the best cast of characters of the entire series. They all have great lines, their animation is great, but in the end I picked Lamont, I think just because he's a little bit quirkier than the others, and sort of our follow-up story for him at the end of the game just makes me laugh, and he goes through a lot with Bess, so yeah, Lamont is great. I mean, they all are, but he's voted as my favorite for that game. For the Phantom of Venice, hands down, really easy pick, Helena Berg, favorite character. She's one of my favorite characters of all time. Possibly is my favorite character. I'm not quite sure, but she's certainly close if she isn't. I love her motivation. She's got some great lines, some just interesting background. I like the idea of her being a journalist. Yeah, she's superb. She's a great character. For The Haunting of Castle Malloy, like some of the other games, I had a hard time picking because I didn't like most of the characters. Matt is the only character I liked, and we only see him at the end of the game, so that's rather tragic. But he was funny, and yeah, he's the only one that sort of made me laugh and want to talk to a character, whereas the others, they didn't need to be there. I didn't like them. And then finally, The Ransom of the Seven Ships. George is my pick because I hated the only other person that we talked to, even though we see Bess at the very end. George we regularly engage with. So that's why she's picked as my favorite character. And I'm not looking at creatures. I mean, I could look at birds for The Curse of Blackmore Manor, Ransom of the Seven Ships, Lulu and Cuckoo. But I hated the birds. Hated them both. They drove me nuts. So yes, George gets my pick for Ransom of the Seven Ships as favorite character. So overall favorite character from these games is Helena Berg. Again, that was an easy pick. Runner-up would have been Joe Hardy, but as far as suspects go, really Helena I found the most intriguing. I liked her storyline. Her motivations are really engaging for me. And then my favorite suspect, or not suspect rather, but my favorite culprit is obviously Helena Berg as well. Because, again, that motivation of hers was really interesting. She had a really well-created backstory. And she's just done overall so well. So there we go. Favorite characters from games 11 through 20. So moving on from that, I'm just going to quickly go over some of my favorite cover art from these games. So starting with The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. This really stands out partly just because of how, I don't want to say how bland it is, but it's not all that colorful. But it's suitable, it's perfect. We're seeing all this snow. The wolf at the front really draws us in. We know that we're focusing on a storyline involving a wolf. I love the lodge in the background. It just feels so comfortable and it's perfect. It's part of the story. And then up in the upper left corner, we have that person trekking through the snow. We've got this not fully frozen creek. It's just beautiful. And being a winter baby, I mean, it's just going to draw me in no matter what. So I love that cover art. The Phantom of Venice is a favorite cover art for sort of the opposite reasons of The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. It's so bold. It's got all this color and sort of some flourish. And similarly, we've got our Phantom right on the cover, so that draws you in immediately. That expression on his face just makes me curious, wondering what's going on in his brain. So it's a great, strong, really powerful cover. And then for the third one, Ransom of the Seven Ships. Even though this is a game I don't like, I love this cover. And I might be biased, blue's my favorite color, but that's going to pull me in immediately. But it's so unique as well. Never before have we seen cover art of anything that's not above ground. I love that we see this whole underwater world. We see this shipwreck, and The shipwreck is designed really well. We see this giant hole in the hull, and we've got presumably Nancy scuba diving, and we see the shark, a couple of sharks, and we see this treasure chest, and there's a whole story underwater, and so that really intrigues me and pulls me in. So those three all have just wonderful cover art, and it's not to say that the other games don't have good cover art, but these are the three that are standouts for me. So moving on from cover art, we're now going to go over some of my favorite lines from these 10 games. These are mostly funny lines. The last one is a bit more serious. So we're starting off with, "Once I saw my Uncle Roger's toupee fly off during a windstorm. Talk about freaky." So that's said by Jane Pemberlin in The Curse of Blackmore Manor. It was just such an unexpected line and absolutely something you'd expect a kid to say, and it stood out and makes me laugh every time because I tend to forget about it. So it's a wonderful line, definitely a favorite line for me. The second line I know a lot of people love. It's well quoted. "Cheeseburger" by Joe Hardy, Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Joe just has some of the best lines, and there's something about that delivery that I know so many people just love. It's so silly, but it works. And then the third one, as noted, is not a funny line. It's actually a bit more serious, and I think it's so accurate and true, and I love it. So it's, "Young lady, never, ever underestimate the power of suggestion. If a person believes in something, even on a subconscious level, fantasy can easily become fact." So Dr. Gilbert Buford says this in Legend of the Crystal Skull. And it's so wise, and as noted before, it's so true, and it's a powerful line, especially when you take time to think about it. So I really appreciated this piece of dialogue. Not only do I like it, but yes, I do truly appreciate it, and I think it's an important piece of dialogue, something we should all consider. So I really love that line. So moving on from lines, we're now going to go to soundtrack, things that are a lot more upbeat, starting with Secret of the Old Clock. I love this soundtrack so much. I have listened to the soundtrack in my current work, my previous jobs as well. It just makes me happy. It's a great soundtrack. Same goes with The Phantom of Venice. So unique and perfect for the setting, and I love it. It's another one I've listened to a lot. And then, again, one of my least favorite games has one of the best soundtracks, Ransom of the Seven Ships. So upbeat for the most part, and the music underwater perfectly fits that. When Nancy does her cave diving, it suitably changes. So it's some of the best and most, I don't want to say accurate, but I don't know, fulfilling music for an environment. It's just wonderful. So these three games have some of the best soundtracks from 11 through 20. Love them. So continuing on, I'm now going to look at some of my favorite puzzles and activities from these 10 games. So most of them are puzzles. There is an activity that's sort of a whole bunch of puzzles together. And I should note, I had a really hard time not picking puzzles that were only in the Haunting of Castle Malloy. That would have been a very easy thing to do, but I've broadened the scope a little bit. But we are going to start off with a puzzle from the Haunting of Castle Malloy, and that's scramble squares. I love scramble squares. They are tough, but they are possible. You just have to figure out a pattern, and it can be really long if you happen to start off with the wrong piece and if you get confused with the method. But I love them, and I think it's so well done. The otters seem so random, but I love it, and I would really like to see more of these in future games. They're fun for me, and it's different because we don't see them that often. This is the only time we've seen it. Next is more of my activity, and this is the scavenger hunt in Legend of the Crystal Skull. And I can look at this in two ways. The scavenger hunt with the cemetery and going through the logbook, but also the fact that the whole game is about a series of scavenger hunts. We've got all these clues, and the whole time we're looking for these glass eyes. So I love that the whole story is basically one giant series of scavenger hunts. And it kept me interested the entire time. I really love it. The next puzzle is the colored Sudoku that we see in Ransom of the Seven Ships in that treasure chest in the water. Give me any Sudoku puzzle and I'm happy. But I really like the uniqueness of this being these colored squares instead of digits. So that was really beautiful. I love the art of it. So yeah, any Sudoku puzzle I'm happy, but I do appreciate sort of the uniqueness to this one. And then the final puzzle or series of puzzles are all the logic puzzles that we see in this batch of games. So we see this in Secret of the Old Clock in terms of sorting the pies. The Haunting of Castle Malloy again. This is with the dollhouse puzzle. Love that logic puzzle, or series of logic puzzles. And even in Ransom of the Seven Ships at the end when we're trying to select the right keyhole. Those are all logic puzzles. And they're great. I love seeing those in games. I'm not always good at them, but I think that they're a lot of fun, and I'm always really happy when I sort them out. So moving on to my favorite single moment from the entire batch of 11 through 20, and I think a lot of people would agree with this. It is Joe and his love of cheeseburgers, and that brings up that favorite line I noted before of cheeseburger. So I'm not going to read the dialogue here, but this is my favorite moment or scene from these games. It comes from Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Just Joe's hysterical. So next I'm going to move on to my favorite storylines, and we're going to see these titles come up again in a little bit, but we're going to start off with The Curse of Blackmore Manor. This was a really interesting storyline, and it really stood out at the time of its release. It felt very unique, and I like that we're diving into family history. We don't see that a whole lot, and this search for something that the family's hidden, and as Nancy starts to put all these pieces together and solve these puzzles, this ghost hunt, these components she's adding to these pillars and diving deeper and deeper into not only the manor but the family. There's these sort of double meanings that you might not realize right away, but I think it's so wonderfully done, and it's captivating and just stood out so much at the time. And then the motivation for our culprit is also part of this storyline and really important, and I don't know, it really hits a nerve kind of in the right way and in a tragic way. So The Curse of Blackmore Manor has just a spectacular storyline that really stands out. The second one is Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. Again, this is more of a passive mystery, but it's historical, which I thought was interesting. We're not on quite so much of a time crunch as we are in the other games, even though, we have limited time to get from point A to point B. But the story was really, really cool, and I like that we're working with other detectives, and we're talking about Jake Hurley and also his loss and trying to put all these pieces together. And then what's motivating our culprit and what the true treasure is. We're not just trying to find Jake Hurley. We're not just trying to find his mine, but we're learning about something else of value that he possessed in the form of a letter, but also this point about the power of being able to make friends and being a friendly person, I think is really important and also is quite striking in this game. So wonderful storyline. The third one is Legend of the Crystal Skull. As noted earlier, the Crystal Skull part doesn't interest me in the least. I tend to forget that that's part of the storyline. But this idea of this persistent scavenger hunt throughout, and sort of the sad backstory too about who Bruno was and not really connecting with other people, but the goodness in him, and of course all the other characters really just make this such a great game. I really like the ending sequence. It's great. I love Legend of the Crystal Skull. And then the final one is The Phantom of Venice. Again, I've mentioned how I really like how Nancy's brought into this mystery. It's a little different than the previous games. And I like what's motivating the culprit, what they feel is worthy of stealing. It's not just pieces of gold. It's not just jewelry, but it's art. And what do we place as far as value on pieces of art and different types of art? And our ending sequence I really like too, but we'll get to that later on. So those 4 games have my favorite storyline through 11 and 20. Next, I like to talk about the best and favorite adaptations from book to game, and I break this down in 2 different ways. So I'm starting by looking at what my favorite adaptation is in terms of the best novel story and the best game story and how they are most similar between the adaptations. So first one is Secret of the Old Clock, and it just amazes me still how marvelously Her Interactive took 4 different stories and included elements from all 4 into one game. They did that so wonderfully. Like they are very similar, and the game itself is wonderful. It doesn't feel broken or like things have been put together awkwardly. It's all very smooth and works together so well. So definitely Secret of the Old Clock is one of the best adaptations as far as similarity and being enjoyable stories. And the second one is Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. There certainly are some differences, but Her Interactive really did follow that super mystery really closely. And the few changes that they made worked really, really well. And I really enjoyed the book, and I really, really love the game. So before I move on to the second form, I will sort of point out, I don't want to call it an honorable mention, but there is one more game where Her Interactive followed that source material incredibly well. The only reason it's not on this list is because I don't view it as a best story, because I don't like the game, and that is Ransom of the Seven Ships. I am amazed by how much Her Interactive incorporated from that original story and turned into the game. So it would be on this list if I actually liked the game, but to me it's not one of the best stories, so it's not here. And then the second way that I'm looking at favorite book to game adaptations is in terms of improvement. So where the novel maybe wasn't interesting, but the computer game was a great story. And I have 3 noted here. So the first is The Curse of Blackmore Manor. I know other people have said this, but I don't understand why Her Interactive picked that book. That is a weird story. And the game is really not really like it. And the game is great. So Her Interactive certainly improved upon that story. The second one is Legend of the Crystal Skull. They are fairly different stories. I mean, the book was meh, and you could see where Her Interactive copied or took elements from it, but their game is so much better than the source material in my view. It's great. And then the third one is another title we see here, The Phantom of Venice. So similarities between book and game are minimal. There's a little bit of an art piece and that they take place in Venice. But beyond that, Her Interactive really improved that story. In some ways, they should be 2 different stories, but yeah, they made really quite a tremendous game based off of that book. Next, we are going to look at some of my favorite locations, and this is not in terms of what was my favorite country or state or town to visit, but in terms of just the overall landscape that was created for the games. So, easy pick, Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. I love that train that was created. It is beautiful and full of all this detail. So just such a great location that Her Interactive created. So just wonderful. The second one is The Curse of Blackmore Manor. As noted before, it's just so expansive and stood out at the time of its release. And there's so much detail also put into this giant manor. So another one of the locations that I really love. It's one of my favorites. And then the third one is The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. And a big part of this is just that snowy atmosphere, the snowy setting. I like that we get to go out on some trails. I like that we get to shovel a snow pond. And even the lodge itself, those guest rooms, the quilts on the beds, there's something about that I just love. So favorite location also goes to The White Wolf of Icicle Creek. It's just so beautifully portrayed, the Canadian Rockies there. And then the next thing is not an area as a whole, and I'm just calling it a room. For my first recap, it really was a bedroom. This is more of an area, I guess. One of my favorite locations, or part of a location, I should say. And it comes from Ransom of the Seven Ships. It's the Dread Isle Resort. That space is beautiful and really makes you feel, or at least for me, makes me feel like I'm on a tropical island. It's very summery. It feels really welcoming. It feels like I'm where I'm supposed to be in that game. So the coloring that's done, the cushions, and I don't have a better screenshot to show that, but yeah, just the diving resort building itself, that structure, I think is just fantastic. It is probably my favorite single space from these games. So following this, I'm now going to go over the endings, and these are for games that we have already seen. They match up with my favorite storylines. So The Curse of Blackmore Manor, one of my favorite endings. This is because of the way that Nancy is going around and trying to solve this case, and she's moving further and further into the manor and this family history. And even more importantly for me is when we discover who the culprit is, their attitude about Nancy beating them to this prize, if you will, and learning their motivation and why they've done what they've done. It's a really important story. It's not a good one. It's really upsetting, but it's very real. And I think really it brings up an opportunity for discussion and about communication with families. So really an important ending and one of my favorite endings. Second one is Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. There's just so many things I love about this game, but the ending is great, and this is it's sort of unique how Nancy gets off the train again, and she's trying to find this mine, and then learning what the culprit is actually after. It's not a gold found in the mine. It's not the mine itself. It's not even about finding Jake. It's what Jake happened to possess, and it was this letter. So that value again of being something a little different, even though there's a monetary value to it, it's a little different than just a gold mine, and not expecting that to be what's motivating our culprit. And then furthermore, with the ending is when Nancy escapes and when she tracks down the culprit again and they get covered in muck. I just love that. The animation there just also stands out, and that just who the culprit is it's entertaining. So great ending. The third one, Legend of the Crystal Skull. So again, finally being able to put all these glass eyes that we've been scavenging for together, and finding the crystal skull, which is sort of unexpected, and it's a really easy ending puzzle rather, but then tracking down the culprit at the end. I love that sequence. I love their monologue. Again, the dialogue is so great in this game, but also that animated sequence is fantastic. And Nancy does have a little bit of involvement just toward the end. And then the culprits sort of squeal at the end, and what happens with the crystal skull, and even the follow-up with one of the other characters who then continues to pursue this object. Just a wonderful ending. And then finally, we have the Phantom of Venice. Also a great ending. There's a really tricky task of getting through the wells, which can be quite frustrating, as well as actually tracking down the culprit. That, not so fun. But once we find the culprit, once we've tracked this person down, that to me is really entertaining. We see them trying to hide against a wall that they don't want Nancy to see them, and just their chat at the end, and again, realizing what their motivation is, and that this person was capable of leading this ring of thieves, and all the detail that's put into that operation just makes for a great ending. So those are my favorite endings for this recap. So then moving on to my favorite memories, these are just associations I have with these games. So The Curse of Blackmore Manor, this was the first international case, and really loving the setting when this game first came out. So that's what stands out as a memory for The Curse of Blackmore Manor. For Secret of the Old Clock, when I first played this game is what stands out the most. So I had been in Europe for 3 weeks, and the game came out, and I know it was waiting for me at home. And I got back to Canada, and it wasn't, I think, for another 2 days before I actually got home. And I was still jet lagged, so I was waking up really early. It's like I was up at 6 o'clock, first morning back home, and I was really excited to start playing this game right away. And then I thought, I should check the message board. I have been away for 3 weeks, so spent an hour checking reports. And then at 7 o'clock, jumping into that game, the earliest I've ever played a Nancy Drew game, earliest as far as time of day. So that's what I remember most for Secret of the Old Clock. For Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, the biggest memory is that this is the first appearance of the Hardy Boys as physical characters, and also just how entertaining they are. That's really stood out for me. Oh, Joe and your cheeseburger, and his line about Samuel Clement and Mark Twain, which I didn't get as a kid. As an adult, I understand it, but yeah, as a kid, that went right over my head. For Danger by Design, unfortunately, it's more of a negative memory. This was the first time I hated an ending of a game for this series. I just couldn't stand it. I didn't like how Nancy is dealing with the culprit, or really what the culprit's doing, but I also don't like the message at the end. I just thought that seemed to be really anti-tattoo. And I mean, I'm not a fan of tattoos, but I just didn't think that was necessary. So, yeah, least favorite ending at the time. Creature of Kapu Cave. The second time I played this game, there was just so much regret. So I'd made a habit of not reviewing games on the message board until I had played them at least twice. And I remember when I decided to play this game for the second time, and I didn't like this game the first time I played it, and it took a while for me to finally say, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to play this for a second time. And it was just like instant regret. Like, why am I playing this game? I hate this game. So that's my memory. I'm not as opposed to it now. I mean, it's still ranked really low, but I'm prepared for it now, and I can find the few positives from it to look forward to when I replay this game. But it's certainly not a game I like to replay. There's usually regret to this day. For The White Wolf of Icicle Creek, big memory is that it's set in Canada. And all that snow, I love the setting. But it was also a third done in a row, as I mentioned earlier. It followed Danger by Design, which I didn't like, and also Creature of Kapu Cave, which I didn't like, and then I didn't like this game, so a lot of disappointment. For Legend of the Crystal Skull, what stood out was me initially being really disinterested, because I had no interest in Crystal Skulls, and I thought the timing of that storyline with the release of the fourth, rather, Indiana Jones film, which was also about crystal skulls. I thought, what's our interactive doing? This is lame and dumb, and I have no interest in this. And then I remember replaying it once when I was in university, and you get that message at the beginning of the game, something along the lines of, draw the curtains, make the room really dark. And I thought, oh, this is a great idea. And I had some candles, and it was fall or winter, so it was dark quite early. So I drew the curtains and lit a bunch of candles, and that just changed the world for me while playing Legend of the Crystal Skull. It just created this atmosphere that I hadn't yet experienced when playing this game, and it really changed it, and I loved it so much. So that is a big part of why I now love the game, was through that particular playthrough and how I'd set up my room where I was playing the game. And also some of the best animation and some of the best dialogue in the entire series is in this game. The interruptions in particular stand out. Just the voice acting team did just superb jobs with this game. Looking at the Phantom of Venice, big memory is that it was a really unique storyline, with Nancy being brought in by the GDIF, and the idea of stolen art being kind of unique. Not the first time, because Secret of the Scarlet Hand involved theft of historical pieces too, but it still really stood out. And the soundtrack being just fantastic. Love it so much. It was one of the things that struck me immediately with this game. Haunting of Castle Malloy, similar thing about soundtrack, except it's not about how great it was, but that the music seemed really quiet. It didn't stand out to me, and I remember as I was playing it thinking, I'm not really hearing the music the way I did before. It's so quiet. So that's what stood out. And then memory for Ransom of the Seven Ships, just the obvious culprit. Also hating the culprit once they were revealed for who they really are, and hating driving the golf cart. So those are my memories for these games. So finally, I'm going to move on to my special topic for this recap, which is about storylines. And again, this is not restricted to games 11 through 20, but it is inclusive of the entire adventure series for all 33 games. Although I really should say 32 because I've not played the 33rd game. So Nancy, as we all know, has had many adventures, and some of the adventures start off with a mystery immediately, while in others she stumbles upon one later on. So I'm going to look at the mysteries that Nancy has had so far, as well as those that the fans have suggested to her interactive over the years. So let's start off with some common mystery themes, and the image I have here is of a treasure. So as you may recall, I was keeping track of all the treasures involved in the stories. So the first 20 games, there are 12 treasures involved. And I know there are even more coming. The very next game I'm going to play for the adventure series, there's another treasure. So this is so prominent in the series. So that is probably the biggest common theme that we see in the games. And it's actually okay. For a while I did get quite bored of it. I remember after Secret of Shadow Ranch came out, I was sort of mixed feelings. I liked that story, but at the same time I was like, okay, we've got another treasure hunt. Can we go to something else now? So that's one of our common themes. Another thing we see quite often is how a mystery starts, and this is with Nancy stumbling upon a mystery, as I mentioned a bit ago. So she's not always invited. Nancy has this interesting luck. I don't know if you want to call it luck, but mysteries find her, or she finds them. I don't know which way you want to put it, but she's not always meant to be investigating a mystery. That's not necessarily how our story starts. But of course we know that's going to come because we are playing what are meant to be mystery games. So that's pretty common. Some other similarities or common themes are being stuck in a single place with, say, secret passages. So I'm going to backtrack to games 3 and 4. Message in a Haunted Mansion. We're in this sort of old mansion, and there are some hidden areas. And then the very next game, Treasure in the Royal Tower, dead ends, but also hidden passages. So we do see those every now and then, and in that case they happen to be back to back. And I don't mind those. I actually really like secret rooms. I think that's really interesting. So we see that every now and then. So those are some of our most common themes that we see in the games. And that can be quite boring, but often it doesn't work out that way, that the stories are unique enough that they don't feel like a carbon copy of what we've already played. So speaking of uniqueness, that's what I'm going to talk about next. There are some unique storylines, and here I've got a screenshot of Nancy's case file looking at Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. And this was selected because it is a game that I feel is quite unique. Nancy teaming up with these other investigators of sorts. We've got a police detective, we have a ghost hunter, we have a novelist who's into history. And then, of course, the Hardy Boys, who solve mysteries as well, similar age group as Nancy. And being on a train was certainly unique, but trying to track down what happened to someone so long ago was certainly a unique storyline. I'm also going to point out the Phantom of Venice, even though it's Nancy being invited in to help solve a mystery. It's the first time where she's being invited by a police organization, so the GDIF. So that was really interesting and unique to me. Some other unique storylines. I don't know if I'd call it a storyline. It's not a storyline, but unique elements. Not fully unique, but we see it so rarely, are even things like the setup. So the final scene, we're in a real time crunch. Nancy has only 3 days. That's really unique, and you feel that pressure. We do see 3 days again in Secret of Shadow Ranch, but the format is different. It's not a time crunch. It's just the game happens to be set quite clearly on a 3-day trend. So that's kind of neat, and I would say unique, certainly as far as the final scene is concerned. And then we can look at Ransom of the Seven Ships. We explore an underwater world. That is unique. We don't see Nancy diving really anywhere else. I mean, Frank does some scuba diving in The Creature of Kapu Cave, but it's a very different feel. It's not, quite as much deep sea diving. There's no sailing. He's mostly looking for shells and going through these lava tubes. So still quite different, quite unique. So it's nice to see when we've got unique storylines. And sort of going back to what I mentioned before about not seeing carbon copies, a lot of the games do have a very similar setup. Like our blueprint for a game is often not fully unique, but the delivery of the stories are all usually so different that I'm still engaged by Nancy's next adventures. I don't feel like I'm still playing something that I played a little while ago or 6 months ago with whatever that release had been. So Her Interactive has done a good job of carrying over, say, some common themes, but making the stories unique as well. Next, I just wanted to touch on fan requests for games. So I've mentioned this before, but I'm a super nerd. I have an Excel sheet where I have made a list of all of the game suggestions from that sticky on the message board. I don't recall what it's called because it's been so long since I looked at it, but basically fan recommendations for what books they would like to see Her Interactive turn into games. So I have them listed as most votes first and making its way down. And this screenshot doesn't even show them all. I think there are 2, maybe 3 more columns that I couldn't fit in. And just to explain, you'll see there are a couple titles highlighted in yellow. Those are all the ones that have been turned into games. So the fan most voted book to be turned into a game is The Hidden Staircase. And if I remember correctly, some of these recommendations were certainly before Secret of the Old Clock came out, but I think some afterwards. And I don't know that everybody realizes that Secret of the Old Clock is based on The Hidden Staircase. That's one of the 4 titles that game is derived from. But it is interesting to see how many people wanted to see that game, or rather that book, turned into a game. And it did happen. Parts of it were included in Secret of the Old Clock. And that's like a whopping lead of 221 votes, if you will. Following this, it's 103 people recommended The Sign of the Twisted Candles. And I remember loving that book as well. It would be great to see Her Interactive turn that into a game. The third one is Mystery of Lilac Inn. Again, this is another story that The Secret of the Old Clock is based off of. So another fan favorite that we did see elements from put into a game. Then we've got The Mystery of the Brass Bound Trunk. This is one of my personal favorites. I think it actually is my favorite Nancy Drew book. I love it. 72 votes. A lot of people would like to see that turned into a game. So could that happen? Danger on the Great Lakes. I'm surprised it's not actually higher, even though it's, the 4th, or rather the 5th most mentioned book. It's one that always has stood out to me as people really recommending. I remember when that book was released and people talking about it on the message board constantly saying, this should be a game. And we still hear that to this day. Not necessarily that title, but people want to see a game set on a cruise ship, which is essentially what Danger on the Great Lakes is about. So will we see that? We were supposed to see something similar with the 3rd Dossier game. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about Dossier games, but it just happens to fit in here. But then that game didn't happen. So will we eventually see that? I don't know. And we've got a lot of suggestions for hardcover books. Those are primarily what we are seeing. Danger on the Great Lakes is sort of the exception for a while. And then we see a paperback again with, I think The Double Horror of Fenley Place is a paperback. So lots of the original stories are recommended by fans or requested by fans to be turned into games. And as we look at which titles have been turned into games, we see that Her Interactive has picked some that fans have certainly said, but there are a lot that a lot of people haven't recommended, haven't thought about, haven't requested to see as games. So it's interesting to see what Her Interactive's picking as far as what the fans think are worthy of being games. So I really wanted to point that out. I thought this was an interesting thing to follow and take a look at. And then the last thing as far as storylines, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the upcoming Nancy Drew game, number 34. Apparently this is happening. I didn't think it would, if I'm being perfectly honest. I had doubts. But we're seeing a lot more information coming out quite frequently. We have seen, up to the point of this recording, 3 character reveals. So, and a lot of people have kind of figured out where it's likely to take place. Spoiler alert, it seems like it's going to take place in Prague. So we've got Nancy going overseas again. And we're curious about what the storyline is. We haven't quite figured it out yet. I know there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not it's going to involve hacking and technology. One of the locations we've seen looks like a technological themed store. We see cell phones and laptops on display. But there's also what looks like a museum. So how do those spaces relate? Or is it just the characters? Something about a violin seems to be part of our storyline, or maybe that's just history. But how do all these little things that we've seen relate? And what book is it based off of? We do know that it is loosely based off of a digest paperback, which have become some favorites for Her Interactive, although they have done a lot more recently based off of, or loosely inspired by, I should say, hardcovers. But yeah, what story have they selected? I know we're all really curious. And we don't have a confirmation for title, although we all are pretty sure what it is because of a copyright. But yeah, we do see another game in the works, or well into the works. We don't know when it's going to be released yet. But I'm curious to see what that adventure is going to be and how it's going to compare with the other games Her Interactive's released, as well as comparing it with what fans have asked to see. So with that, just to summarize, there are several repeated themes and aims in our games. So treasures in particular, those stand out, but we see sabotage and threat, and we've had a few disappearances and kidnappings. But most of the games tend to be unique, and they don't feel like replicas of stories that have already been told. Her Interactive has managed to keep the stories interesting in that regard. So that is my special topic, ladies and gentlemen, wrapping up storylines for the series. So that is the end of my recap video. I had a lot of fun talking about these 10 games. Sadly, they're not my favorite games. I preferred the games from my first recap video. I really loved those earliest games. But that's not to say there wasn't anything enjoyable in this one. I love Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, Secret of the Old Clock, great. Legend of the Crystal Skull, I can't believe how much I love this game that I had absolutely no interest in when it first came out. And pointing out elements that I managed to love in games that I hated, like Haunted of Castle Malloy. Don't care about that story, but it has some of the best puzzles. Same thing for Ransom of the Seven Ships. Horrible storyline, hated the lack of suspects, but great soundtrack and really interesting puzzles, really well delivery for puzzles, some neat adaptations, particularly with that Sudoku puzzle. So this is the end of my recap video for games 11 through 20. Thank you so much, everyone who stuck through this discussion. I know it's been over an hour. Same thing with my first recap. These are a bit lengthy, much longer than I would have anticipated originally, but I had fun talking about them, and thank you so much for listening to me blabbering on about the things I enjoy so much. Have a splendid day, everyone, and I look forward to continuing on with my playthroughs, book to game comparisons, and further recaps. Bye-bye.